Life has a tendency of throwing unexpected curveballs at you, especially when you think you have it all figured out. I never imagined returning back home after college would result in such a complex position. Yet here I am, Ethan Thompson. I'm about to tell you how my world turned upside down. At first, returning to live with my father Dylan and stepmother Aurora seemed like a good idea. The job market was tough, and staying with them while looking for work made financial sense. Aurora had been my stepmother for 15 years, and we always got along well. Aurora was 62, but she carried herself with a grace and energy that made her appear much younger. She kept herself fit through yoga and swimming, and her silver streak brown hair perfectly framed her kind face. She had always been more of a friend than a stepmother. The first few weeks back home were comfortable and routine. Dad worked long hours at his construction company, while Aurora managed her small online business. From home, I spent my days sending out resumes and preparing for interviews. That fateful morning began like any other. I had an important job interview later that day and was getting ready in the bathroom. The steam from my shower had fogged up the mirror, and I was carefully shaving when I heard a soft knock on the door. Karen's voice came through, asking if she could quickly grab her medication from the cabinet without thinking twice, so I told her to come in. We'd always been casual about such things in our house. She entered wearing her usual silk robe, reaching for the medicine cabinet above the sink. What happened next seemed to play out in slow motion. As she stretched upward, her robe caught on the cabinet handle, causing it to slip open. The moment felt frozen in time. Our eyes met in the steamy mirror, both of us suddenly aware of the situation. Ken quickly gathered her robe, her cheeks flushing red. "I'm so sorry. Ethan, please don't tell your father about this," she whispered before hurrying out that day. I couldn't concentrate on my interview because the morning's incident kept replaying in my head, bringing confusion and feelings I never expected to have for Karen. Karen avoided me for the rest of the day, and dinner that evening was awkwardly quiet. The next morning I found a note slipped under my door. Karen's elegant handwriting asked if we could talk privately when Dad left for work. My heart raced as I read those words, knowing this conversation would change everything. We met in the kitchen after Dad left. Aurora was across from me, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Ethan, about yesterday," she began, her voice trembling slightly. She admitted the bathroom incident had stirred feelings she didn't expect, feelings she thought she was too old to have. I found myself opening up to confessing that I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. The tension in the room was palpable as we sat there, both acknowledging something had shifted between us. Aurora reached across the table, her hand gently touching the simple contact that sent electricity through my body. Before I could process what was happening, we were standing close to each other, the morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window illuminating Karen's face, highlighting the uncertainty and desire in her eyes, seemed to stop as we moved closer. Our lips met in a gentle, hesitant kiss. Lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. We pulled apart, and the reality of what we'd done hit us both hard. Aurora stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. "This is wrong," she whispered, but her eyes told a different story. I knew I should have agreed and walked away, but something held me there. The following few days became a delicate dance of stolen glances and careful distances. We both tried to act normal around Dad, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. Every accidental touch, every moment alone, became charged with unspoken emotions. I started making excuses to stay home more, pretending to work on job applications while really hoping for moments alone with Aurora. She seemed to do the same, finding reasons to be in whatever room I was in. The guilt was she looked troubled, her usual composure cracking. "We need to talk about this," she said, closing the door behind her. She sat beside me on the small sofa, close enough that I could smell her familiar lavender perfume, the same scent that had comforted me through high school breakups. Now it stirred something entirely different in me. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about how wrong this was or how right it felt, about the impossibility of our situation, and the sound of the door slamming brought us back to reality. Dad had arrived home early and we leaped apart, straightening our clothes and hair, trying to look normal as we heard his key in the front door that evening. Sitting across from Dad at dinner, the weight of our secret felt crushing. He talked about his day, completely unaware of how his son and wife had spent the afternoon. Aurora barely touched her food after dinner. Aurora left a note in my room. Meet me in the garden at midnight. I knew I should ignore it and end this before it goes too far, but I couldn't resist. I can't stop thinking about you, Ethan. I know it's terrible, but I've never felt this way before. Sitting next to her, our thighs touching, the night air was chilly, but I felt overheated. I said, I feel it. The admission hung between us like a tangible thing. We kissed again, more passionately this time, her hands exploring my chest as mine traced the curve of her waist. The forbidden nature of our connection only made it more intense. The barking of a dog in the distance startled us apart. Reality kicked in. We were in the open, where anyone could see us, and the risk we were taking suddenly seemed insane. Aurora stood up. She straightened her clothes and remarked, "We can't do this here." But her eyes held a promise of more. We agreed to be more careful, to find safer moments to be together. The next few days were torture. Watching Aurora with my dad pretending everything was normal while underneath our shared secret burned hot. Every family dinner became an exercise in self-control. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake, thinking about Aurora in the next room. The walls seemed too thin, the house too small for the magnitude of what was happening between us. One morning I found Aurora alone in the kitchen again. The memory of our first kiss there hung heavy in the air. Without a word, she moved into my arms, fitting perfectly against me. We knew we were playing with fire. Each touch, each stolen moment, brought us closer to being discovered, but the attraction between us had become impossible to resist. Aurora tried to maintain boundaries to keep some semblance of propriety, but every time we were alone, those boundaries crumbled like sand castles in the tide. The tension built day by day. Simple moments became charged with meaning. Passing each other in the hallway, catching each other's eyes across the dinner table, and brief touches while doing dishes. Dad noticed something was different but attributed it to job search stress. If only he knew the real reason for the change in his son and wife's behavior. As the days passed, our connection grew stronger. What started as physical attraction developed into something deeper, more complicated. We found ourselves sharing thoughts and feelings we'd never expressed to anyone else. The guilt remained, but it was overshadowed by the intensity of our feelings. Each day brought us closer to a point of no return, a decision that would change everything. In the morning, change started like any other. Dad had left early for work, and I found Aurora in the kitchen making coffee. She wore the same silk robe from that first morning in the bathroom, but this time there was nothing accidental. Our eyes met across the kitchen, and without saying anything, we went toward each other, coffee forgotten. Aurora brushed against me, her hands sliding beneath my t-shirt. This kiss was different, desperate, hungry, and full of weeks of pent-up desire. I lifted her onto the kitchen counter and stood between her legs as we kissed. Her robe fell open, and this time there was no awkward apology, no rush to cover up. Her skin was soft under my hands, her breathing heavy against my neck. What happened was unavoidable. We came together in a passionate embrace. All thoughts of consequences temporarily forgotten. The kitchen counter, where I'd eaten breakfast for years, became the stage for our first real intimate encounter. Afterward, we held each other. Reality slowly seeped back in. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, reminding us that time hadn't stopped even though it felt like it had. Karen's fingers traced patterns on my chest as we caught our breath. "We can't take this back," she whispered, her voice a mix of satisfaction and concern. Of stolen moments and secret meetings, we found creative ways to be together. Early mornings before Dad woke up, afternoons when he was at work, and quiet moments in the garden after dark. Aurora seemed to grow younger with each passing day, her happiness making her radiant. I found myself falling deeper into our physical connection, growing into something more emotional, more complex, but guilt began to eat at both of us. Every time Dad hugged Aurora or told me how proud he was of it, felt like a knife was twisting in my belly. We were betraying him in the worst manner conceivable. One evening, as we lay together in her yoga room while Dad worked late, Karen began crying, saying, We can't keep doing this. But her arms tightened around me even as she spoke the words. I held her close, breathing in her familiar lavender scent. I know, I replied, but neither of us made a move to let go. We'd become addicted to each other in this forbidden connection we'd created. The next morning, Dad announced he had to go on a week-long business trip. Aurora and I carefully avoided looking at each other, both knowing what this meant. A whole week of freedom to be together that week was like living in a dream. We cooked together, watched movies, cuddled on the couch, and spent long hours exploring each other's bodies and minds. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most perfect dreams. Midweek, Dad called to say he might come home early. The news sent us into a panic, forcing when I returned home that evening, Karen was waiting in the garden. She looked beautiful in the fading light, but there was sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," she said, patting the space beside her on the bench. I sat down, my heart heavy with the knowledge that everything she started was founded on lies and betrayals, and we cannot continue to live like this. I knew she was correct, but the notion of terminating things made my chest tighten. What would we do? Already anticipating the response, she added, hesitantly, "Your father doesn't deserve this, and you deserve a chance at a normal relationship with someone your own age." The words hurt even though I knew they were true. Aurora, my father's wife, and no matter how strong our feelings were, that fact would not change. We sat in silence for a long time, hands clasped, watching the sunset. Everything felt final, as if we were attending a funeral for something that had barely had a chance to exist. "I should move out," I finally said. It was the only solution that made sense. Staying in the house and seeing Aurora every day while trying to suppress our feelings would be impossible. Karen nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I think that's best. But Ethan," she turned to face me, her eyes intense, "I need you to know that what happened between us was real. It wasn't just physical attraction or a midlife crisis." I pulled her close one last time, memorizing the feel of her in my arms. "I know," I whispered into her gentle and bittersweet embrace. It held all the things we couldn't say: the regret, the love,